Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
From immigration to HIV and healthcare to criminal justice reform, there was definitely no shortage of topics in President Trump's State of the Union address, and it seems only fitting that on The State of Us, we'll be talking about the State of the Union today. But maybe not in quite the way you'd imagine. So why should you care about what Lance and I think of this? Because we're awesome. So that's why you care. It's a unique perspective. How's that?
That's better.
You're probably
we're not going to talk about it like everybody else.
Right. You're going to get something different. So we're going to focus on two things today: the policy ideas that were discussed and the good things that were highlighted. Okay. So there will also be, in some of those policy items or good things that happened, we may do one or two fact checks. Of course, there's a lot more comprehensive ones out there. So again, full disclosure, we're not going to go word by word for the State of the Union, but Lance and I both watched it, and we both have a full copy of the exact text that he spoke yesterday in front of us. And we've gone through, highlighted a few things that we're going to talk about, what we believe are the most important things to mention. So on that note, we'll get underway. And the source, of course, for this is the White House website. So there you have it, in case you're wondering where we got it. The agenda I will lay out this evening is not a Republican agenda or a Democrat agenda. It's the agenda of the American people. This quote there by President Trump in his speech echoes how he began and finished his State of the Union, which was not in an unusual fashion for a president giving the State of the Union, which is to call for bipartisanship and unity and, let's work together, and together we can solve anything. And I'm not trying to downplay the possibility of that, because I think that is true. I think that if our legislative officials did work together more, we would see more progress happen faster. So I'm not saying that what I think he's calling for is a bad thing, because I don't. I think it's a good thing. But it's also incredibly common for presidents to call for this, and oftentimes without any meaningful suggestion of how it'll happen. So my takeaway from that was, it was a nice sentiment to begin with and a nice one to close with, but I'm not holding my breath for it, Lance. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. So
because in the speech he said some things that you could make out as positives for those people that usually disagree with him, but he didn't give details as to what he meant by those things. So we'll have to see what he does with that. I mean, like infrastructure, positives for women.
Right.
Yay, women are 52 or 58% of the workforce, and there are more women in Congress. Okay. So what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
It's okay. So
some of it's what you expect
so
in
what
the
are the
State of the
details
Union,
behind
which is just a report of, it's just a report of basically what has happened kind of thing. I think that some of that's been carried over, and you tell me, senior historian, some of that's been carried over from a time where it was more important to do that because people weren't as connected as they are. So it was doing a service in part to the American people and to the legislative body of saying, here's all these things that have been going on, in addition to here's where we want to go. So some of it gets stale from the point of, this is not like a lot of this should be a big surprise, because in an ideal world, the media's already reported on all these things. But as you're going to find out today, there may be a few things that you were like, I don't remember hearing anything about that. So that's part of what we're trying to do too, is move a little bit beyond the politics of the State of the Union, which I think is what most are talking about, and talk a little bit more about some of what was highlighted by it that we think are worth noting. So he ended that introduction to bipartisanship by saying, we must choose between greatness or gridlock, results or resistance, vision or vengeance, incredible progress or pointless destruction. So definitely strong words. But again, like we said, the question is, whether or not there's any realistic hope that they'll actually work together. So first big policy thing we come to is the economy. No surprise here either, that this is the first thing if I was betting, I probably would have said, Lance, I'm either going to bet the economy is the first thing he talks about or the wall. Those are, knowing this president, those would be the first policy points that we would hear about. So he points out that we've created 5.3 million new jobs and importantly added 600,000 new manufacturing jobs. Nearly 5 million Americans have been lifted off food stamps and unemployment has reached the lowest rate in over half a century. Now, there was a lot of applause surrounding this. Some of you may, though, have been wondering, why weren't the Democrats doing much in the way of applauding this? And Lance, before I give my take on this, because they did, in fairness to the Democrats, they did stand a number of times and applaud things. The whole chamber did. But why not on this? Because these are, right? Everybody can be happy about the economy. So why not stand, Lance? Well, the economy, the wealthier have gotten wealthier. The tax break took care of the wealthiest Americans. It didn't take care of the middle class. Real wages have not really gone up in respect with how well the stock market has improved. The manufacturing jobs are pretty much stagnant since 2015. If you want to look at, again, the government release of the number of jobs, it's still pretty stagnant. So those manufacturing jobs have not increased. We know here in Ohio, we've got car plants that are closing. So there's not a large number of manufacturing jobs. Most of the manufacturing jobs that came about, according to Trump's government, came about because of his trade war with China to raise prices on things, which made American businesses that were closed reopen. There really hasn't been a big movement of American businesses that went offshore for tax purposes to move back onshore. There aren't a lot of new places. So when do you want me to stop? You can go ahead and stop. It is interesting though, because you took a different direction than I did.
Okay.
When I was watching it, what I was thinking is, I think they're probably not going to applaud this, not because they're not happy about, these economic numbers, but because they don't want to be seen as giving credit to Trump, indicating that he was the one who did it. In other words, they still got their loyalty to President Obama is what I'm getting at, saying, yeah, these good things happened, but that's because you were handed a country that was on the mend and these things just they handled themselves. In other words, maybe you messed it up a little. Maybe we didn't like exactly everything you did. Maybe you did a little bit to help it. But at the end of the day, the reality is all the legwork was done long before you took over, buddy. And these are just in line with what was already going on. So see, that was I was thinking, they don't want to inadvertently look like, oh yeah, this is thanks to you. They want to hold that line and say, no, this was already going this way. And it's because of our guy, not your guy. But when jobs are plentiful, so I don't know. Shouldn't pay go up? I mean, I went into 3 establishments yesterday evening after my wife got home from work. All 3 were accepting applications. But the pay, while greater than minimum wage, was still not great. 30% lower than what it should be based on what we've talked about in the past, with it needing to be, right, $15 an hour to equal the $3.35 an hour that I made. 15 is about, as Lance and I have talked about, 15 to 17. Right. I mean, 15, I'm taking the low number. Yeah. On the national scale, we learned, that the bottom, living wage, which ideally would be what we would think the minimum wage is, national average was around 15. The high end was around 18. And in little tiny towns like Urbana, we were around 12. So it's it does vary because obviously the cost of living varies. But at the end of the day, when federal minimum wage is at $7.25 and a lot of states are just scratching $8, we're still, like Lance said, we're still talking about, even if they're offering $10 an hour in most places, pretty much everywhere, that's still way below where it's supposed to be. That's not a livable wage. Right. I mean, that's not, by itself, that's not what we used to consider to be a livable wage. And most of those jobs aren't 40 hours a week. They won't give you 40 hours a week because they don't want to have to give you insurance and different benefits. Right. So you end up putting a few of those together, several of them together, and then you got to go buy your insurance and, you get into that whole situation. So
I see your point.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as they don't want to give Trump the credit, but I took it differently. And that is, it really hasn't improved as much as
the numbers would lead you to think it has. Yeah. Because the
for
numbers are good
for those people that
need it the
are
most.
struggling.
Yeah.
Or are down there and trying to make their way up. Things have been very good for those people at the top.
Right.
And in the upper middle class, but not for the folks down that are lower on the economic scale.
So now we move on to because we're going to talk about policy and good things that were mentioned. A good thing that was mentioned, at least I think in Lance and I's opinion, is to give critically ill patients access to life-saving cures. We passed, very importantly, right to try. We did cover this a while back. I think we did an episode on it, or it made it into an episode on something else. But this was a rare instant where Congress transcended party lines and came together and passed basically what it sounds like, which is if a doctor deems you to be past a certain point, where you are like going to die, it's almost a certainty, then you all of a sudden get access to all these experimental treatments, which typically you wouldn't have access to.
Right.
Which Lance and I have always said with healthcare stuff, it's your life. If you want to die, you should be allowed to die. If you want to try and use anything at your disposal, you ought to be allowed to, on and on. And part of what this did is it eliminated some of the risk that hospitals and doctors were taking on, which is why traditionally they wouldn't do that. Not because they couldn't necessarily, but because the policy was, no, it's not worth, we use this experimental treatment and something terrible happens to you and then we get in trouble.
It's not worth the pushback.
Right. So some of it focused on that. And
that's always good.
Yeah.
Could it go further? Why do you have to wait till you're on deathbed to try this stuff?
Right.
It makes the likelihood of it being successful even less.
Right.
So, but it is at least something in the right direction because it gives the patient more control over their life, which I think we both agree on.
Yeah, exactly. And energy is the next policy thing that he came to. The United States is now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. And now for the first time in 65 years, we are a net exporter of energy. From an economic standpoint, Lance, I'd say, obviously, great anytime we can export something. From a humanitarian /
from an environmental
standpoint, I'd say, I don't know if that's the thing that we want to be known for leading.
Yeah.
For,
we opened up ANWR. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Republican controlled House and Senate in the last 2 years. We opened up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska so we can produce oil. Great. It's
right. So
I don't know, guys. I mean, it's okay. So yes, economically, but,
if we can't breathe, then
the money's not going to do you any good if you don't have any place to live, or when you all come stampeding into our neck of the woods because the ocean levels have risen
and flooded all your coastal towns.
Yep. And you start coming in our neighborhoods and, we use our Second Amendment rights and defend our property. So, yep. Come on in.
Yep.
Sorry. I can't get real positive over the fact that we're producing enough fossil fuel for ourselves.
That's what I was going to ask.
If it had been, geothermal and solar energy has now bypassed fossil fuel use in the United States, I'm there as a plus.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a plus.
Not a net plus.
Right.
I
understand.
It's a positive for the economy, negative for the environment, and the negative for the environment's more than outweighs the positive for the economy.
Right. We're not back in the 70s where we're dependent on Arab oil to function.
Yes.
Which is, people can't hold us hostage with oil. So from that aspect, but I would have liked to have seen us do it in a different manner than just being able to produce more gas, more oil.
He also mentioned that in the last Congress, both parties came together to pass unprecedented legislation to confront the opioid crisis, a sweeping new farm bill, historic VA reforms, and after 4 decades of rejection, we passed VA accountability so that we can finally terminate those who mistreat our wonderful veterans. This is, again, something that the State of Us did indeed cover when we talked about the VA Accountability Act as that happened. And the mixed bag there of, you don't want it to be too easy to terminate employees, but we definitely agreed it was a move in the right direction, because at the end of the day, it was obvious when you read about some of the cases that it was way too difficult to get rid of people who definitely were not doing a good job. And if there's anybody who deserves a good job, it's absolutely the veterans. So there's no reason that they should have to put up with subpar people because we have policy that's subpar.
So again, it's good.
Yeah.
Would nice to see it if it had been pushed a little further, but it is an improvement over what was.
Yep. And so the point in what he was talking about in that part of the speech is, look, we have done bipartisan stuff, so we definitely can continue to do bipartisan stuff. We'll do one more good thing here, Lance, before we transition back into a policy item, the big one, immigration. So he says, quote, "My administration worked closely with members of both parties to sign the First Step Act into law. Big deal," end quote. Start quote again. "The First Step Act gives nonviolent offenders the chance to re-enter society as productive, law-abiding citizens. America is a nation that believes in redemption," end quote. I think a good message to support something that is probably a step in the right direction. The reason I say probably is because I really would like to talk to somebody from the last mile that Lance and I have had on before now to kind of get their take on it. Because truth be told, I think Lance and I have had a number of ideas about criminal justice reform, but it can be tough to tell, is the bill going to do more harm than it does good? Right. But it's nice to know that at least Congress was actually trying to do something on criminal justice, So.
Nope, I agree.
And to send the message, anytime the president says something like America is a nation that believes in redemption, kind of countering that when we had our old policy of, no exceptions, we want these bad people behind bars kind of thing.
I thought the president and his speechwriter, whoever put this all together, it was good theater last night.
Yeah.
I mean, they hit on all the heartstrings.
A lot of stuff.
Had the right people there, had the veterans, had the little girl who was a, cancer survivor, had the gentleman there who had come out of jail and was now contributing and doing good things. So it was good theater, and it played on all the right heartstrings. Let's see what the follow through is.
Yep.
That's my only thing with the president.
Is any of this going to turn into anything?
Right. Is it going to continue to work in this manner? I hope so. Because it did do some good things. It was, and he stuck to the script, which I thought when he was getting some of the applause,
I thought he was going to go off.
He might go off script and make a mistake. So I will commend him for his ability to stay on script, and that the script was very well done.
I'm sorry, I'm chuckling. I'm just thinking
but it was well done. I mean, I'm saying it was well done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it did. And I told Lance that beforehand. As far as State of the Union speeches go, I told him I thought the speech, itself, forget about the person delivering it, was a relatively standard State of the Union speech. And it was standard in the respect that the president pretty much followed all the typical protocol for the State of the Union speech, less the forgetting to allow Nancy Pelosi to introduce him. But beyond that, it was pretty standard. And like Lance said, hitting on all the typical, guests and all that kind of stuff. So before we continue, though, and talk about the immigration portion, which was by far and away the largest portion of the speech, it's important, Lance, to tell people what we're trying to do here, why we're taking time to talk about the State of the Union on the State of Us in a unique way. So what is TrueChat trying to accomplish?
Well, our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
And if people have any ethical concerns with today's episode, we encourage them to email ethics@truechat.org. Again, that's ethics@truechat.org. Let us know your thoughts. And of course, if you want to join the discussion, let us know what your take on the State of the Union was. We'd love to hear it at TrueChat.org, TrueChat.org on Facebook, Twitter, and more. So definitely reach out and find us there. Immigration, Lance. The State of the Union naturally was going to feature something on immigration. When we printed this out, it's about 20 pages, okay? And so I'm trying to tell people that for frame of reference. The immigration portion of his speech took up about 2.5 pages. So we could say 10%, yeah?
Right.
I mean, roughly.
I mean, he spoke for a long time. He had a lot of things to say.
Roughly 10% of the speech was about immigration. And I'm not going to read all of it. So we have a moral duty to create an immigration system that protects the lives and jobs of our citizens. This includes our obligation to the millions of immigrants living here today who followed the rules and respected our laws. Legal immigrants enrich our nation and strengthen our society in countless ways. That's not too contrary to things he said before, but this next piece is, I think, the one that was a little surprising to people when he said, and I quote, "I want people to come into our country in the largest numbers ever, but they have to come in legally," end quote. I will say that was one that was a little, because that is kind of not what he's been saying. Or am I crazy, Lance? I mean, the largest numbers ever, he wants, because a lot of it's been about keeping people out, and reducing, making it tough for people to get in. And
do you remember when he first became president, when he made the racial slant at, I'm okay with smart people to come in if they're the white, if they're the right. Sorry for my Freudian slip there, but this was the president speaking.
Right.
So he's okay with people coming in as long as they're the air quotes right people.
So he just didn't specify that here,
right.
But it's right.
I think he's still in line with what he did back when he first became president. Okay. And the Supreme Court said, you can't do this, about keeping Muslims out. And, and he said, well, I don't want people from, the South to come in and people from Haiti and from Africa. And, and he was referring to people of color, but he wanted well-educated people to be able to come in. And his assumption was that if you're a person of color, then you can't be well educated. So I think that's where he's fallen in line there. He's not against immigration.
Just from certain areas.
Right.
Okay.
Which he deems as not good.
I had to do a fact check here, Lance. I'm sorry. I don't want this episode to be a fact check thing because we could spend a long time on that. But he says, quote, "Meanwhile, working class Americans are left to pay the price for mass illegal immigration, reduced jobs, lower wages, overburdened schools, hospitals that are so crowded you can't get in, increased crime, and a depleted social safety net," end quote. Now, real quick, reduced jobs. No. We actually have more open jobs, which he pointed out in his speech later, than ever before. In fact,
I was going to say that goes against what he said.
Right. We have so many jobs that even if every unemployed American took the job, we still wouldn't have enough people to work. So no, not reduced jobs. Lower wages. Also no, because he highlighted in the economy section that wages have increased and are increasing at a higher pace than they have in the past, 20 years or something. So also not true. According to this speech, you can look up the factual stuff, but just a contradiction at the very least. Increased crime, which we've specifically covered before, saying that on the average, an immigrant is less likely to commit a crime than a native-born American by a substantial margin. So also not true. They have not led to a disproportionate increase in crime. Sorry. Because really, I did try, and Lance can tell you, I tried to stay positive about this whole thing.
Yes, that was your whole tact today.
And now we get to go on to a good thing again, so I'm glad.
Oh, okay.
That one upset me.
That's all we're doing with immigration?
Unless you got something else. I mean, like I said, he spent 2.5 pages on it, but a lot of it's all stuff we've heard before, and he did the thing where I'm going to build the wall, and I'm going to build the barrier, which is now... Yeah.
No, he said there will be some form of a real wall because it will stop people from coming in. And he gave San Diego and El Paso as examples. And the El Paso police chief said, president is wrong again in a fact check. Mm-hmm. But he did say there would be real wall up. And it was interesting. He's tweaking things. He said, and we're going to do it around ports of entry. So it will stop drugs from coming in.
Not everywhere.
So,
it's slowly being and in fairness
which
to the
I found interesting.
Right. That
he's
is
starting to adapt it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think there's going to be a shutdown or
something
or a crisis proclaimed by the president.
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be, do you think the president's going to sign something coming from Congress?
Up until the moment where he said, I'm going to build it, up until that moment, I was thinking, I mean, I would not have been completely shocked if he had taken a strange step in this speech and basically said, I'm ready to compromise, because of all the bipartisan stuff in the beginning. Of course, that didn't happen, but you're right. I mean, he really did ease up. I mean, despite all of us who don't like the idea of the wall for factual or non-factual reasons, whatever it is, I do think that there's something to be said for, he really did give some serious leeway there on, basically without saying it, it's probably not going to be the whole southern border. It's going to be some strategic areas, and it's going to be different kinds of barriers based on the areas that it's needed. So, and those are very contrary to what he's been on for the last 2 years, which is a concrete wall that goes the whole length of the border. So, yeah, I mean,
but he played to the fear mongering because he had the person from the family from Reno, Nevada, who had family who was killed, unfortunately, who unfortunately were killed by an illegal immigrant, or at least according to the president, it was. I don't know. I didn't, I'm just taking it at face value. And he also, talked about that it will get built and it will be a physical wall. So it's interesting. He kind of gave a mixed message, I think it will be interesting to see how the next week and a half plays out, because we're done on the 15th as far as the
coming up
government shutdown. So a week from Friday. Okay.
Might be back in shutdown mode. We'll see. So the next good thing was on women. Quote, no one has benefited more from our thriving economy than women, who have filled 58% of the newly created jobs last year. And then there was a pause for a standing applause, and this included the Democrats and the women who were wearing white in honor of women's suffrage. And then Trump goes on to say, quote, you weren't supposed to do that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. End quote. Not end quote. All Americans can be proud that we have more women in the workforce than ever before. And then again, applause. And then he says, don't sit yet. You're going to like this. And then goes on to say, and exactly 1 century after Congress passed the constitutional amendment giving women the right to vote, we also have more women serving in Congress than at any time before, end quote. And then, of course, applause, standing ovation, Nancy Pelosi's little arm gesturing to say, hey, look at all the Democratic women and the not so many Republican women. So that was that whole area there. But regardless of the politics of the situation, obviously, I think we all would hope that's a plus. Since women do make up a slightly larger majority of the country than men, it only makes sense that their representation in the House, at least, continues to increase.
But we don't talk about wage disparity among the sexes.
No.
Okay, so just make sure that stuff's still out there.
That's right.
I mean,
there's a long ways to go. They still don't occupy even close to half of Congress. So
we can't read the president's mind, but I just wonder if he was being open and honest with his feelings, or if he was being slightly condescending by mentioning those things.
Hard to know.
Or trying to go after the female vote, which he'll need for reelection.
True. So maybe he's trying to ease up there and repair some of that image of his disdain for women who aren't what he considers attractive.
He's trying to repair his numbers, and the people, the electorate who voted for him, if he has, desires, which it seems like he does, to get reelected, he needs to repair some of those bridges.
So on trade, that's the next policy thing he came to. He said, quote, I am also asking you to pass the United States Reciprocal Trade Act so that if another country places an unfair tariff on an American product, we can charge them the exact same tariff on the exact same product that they sell to us, end quote. This was an interesting one because it's not the way I would have assumed a idea about trade would have been put in place. And at first glance, I guess, without reading more about the United States Reciprocal Trade Act, I guess I wouldn't say I'm in direct opposition to it, and it didn't seem like the lawmakers were either. It was one of those, they didn't stand to applaud. It was the, sit and applaud and move on, because literally there's just it's just a single sentence on this. So,
Yeah, but
in theory, it sounds...
It's kind of that childish,
right.
Well, if you do this to me, I'm going to do it to you.
Yeah.
That's not the way you write trade agreements. We have corn and you need corn, and you have, I don't know, I can't think of anything, steel, coal, everybody's going, rah, but that's okay, we need that. So let's make a trade. I've got extra of something you need and you have extra of something I need. That's how you make trade agreements.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I do with you. You got something I want.
Well,
I have something you want. It's not always the same thing. Why would you want my steel versus your steel? Or why would you want, you've got a few extra eggs laying around from the chickens, or, some chickens that you want to get rid of. And I'm like, yeah, I like chicken. And you need my truck to carry some bales of hay to help get the hay in. So we make a trade. I let you borrow my truck and I get a few chickens. I mean, we're not even trading the same things. We're trading the excesses we have. So I don't know. I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an agreement. Right. They agreed.
Yeah.
Congress agreed. So yay. All right.
Well, they haven't passed this yet.
Oh, he wants them to.
Right.
Gotcha.
He's asking them to. He also didn't mention much about infrastructure. We had basically one sentence. So it's kind of like this trade thing. It's like, okay, hopefully it happens, but I don't know.
Nothing's going to happen till the wall gets done. Do you think?
No.
I think nothing will take place until the wall is decided upon.
We're going to skip. I mean, he said drug prices experienced their single largest decline in 46 years. Yay. Again, this goes back to the healthcare thing we mentioned before, where Democrats weren't really applauding because they either look at it as there's a longer way to go, we don't like the way you went about it, or we're honoring President Obama, or all three of those things. Right. So it's just kind of more of that. He does go on to explain, and this was an interesting one because this was one of the few set a deadline kind of thing and do it. He said in recent years, we have made remarkable progress in the fight against HIV and AIDS. Scientific breakthroughs have brought a once distant dream within reach. My budget will ask Democrats and Republicans to make the needed commitment to eliminate the HIV epidemic in the United States within 10 years. So of the many things he talked about wanting to do, this was the only one where he basically said, I'm asking for the money in the budget, and I'm saying that we're going to do it within 10 years. So even if you don't like maybe what he's talking about doing, like spending more money on this, it was odd, I guess, to me that this was the thing that you make the set a timeline, ask for the money kind of thing. It just kind of felt like out of left field. Because this is not one of those things that I'd say, I didn't even know it was on the president's radar until then.
Well, I didn't even know it was still a hot issue.
I mean, it's been one of those, that's a whole other thing, how the lovely United States government ignored the epidemic while over 800,000 Americans suffered and died because of it. But all of that aside, it's, should have been handled long ago. It's actively being handled. It continues to improve. So it's not quite the same as if it had been said in the 90s.
That's my point. I mean, it's like
if President Bill Clinton stood up when he first did his first State of the Union and said this, that would have made
right. We've been fighting the HIV
time.
and AIDS epidemic for 20 some years.
Yeah.
So to come out now and say it is like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice, again.
I mean, it raised my eyebrows, but I didn't really know that it was
right.
as big an issue as it had been in the past.
We're going to go just a little bit over today, folks, because we're almost done, but I think this is important. So this is a fact check again. Quote, lawmakers in New York cheered with delight upon the passage of legislation that would allow a baby to be ripped from the mother's womb from birth, end quote. Now, technically, that is true. However, it is misleading in that what New York did was they basically cleansed old legislation that wasn't active anyway to default back to the federal law, which prohibits late-term abortion after 26 weeks unless, and there's two very important exceptions, the fetus is not viable, so it wouldn't live anyway, or the mother's life is at risk. So it's misleading in that what people may interpret it as is they can yank a perfectly viable fetus the day before it's supposed to be born. Right. No, that's not what it means. So just to be clear, just so everybody's on the same page, because we actually had that talk in studio and we never even covered that thing because as we learned and understood what was actually happening, it was like, it's kind of irrelevant because all they're doing is just reaffirming federal law anyway. So they didn't actually really change anything. And no, you can't just murder, the fetus the day before it's born if it's in perfect health and the woman's life is not at risk. So different discussion for a different day. He mentioned the Russia thing that we talked about, withdrawing from the arms thing. So
the INF treaty.
Yep. Not a big surprise there. I was a little mad at the Democrats for not standing on that one and at least joining with Republicans and applauding. Because like Lance and I talked about. Oh, you want to
proliferate the use of nuclear weapons?
Of course not. But like you and like you and I both said on the air, there was not a reasonable alternative to what he did. We both said that was the right choice. So the Democrats were just doing the thing of being able to use
No, I didn't say that. I said he's doing it to go after China. Which he admitted in his State of the Union address.
Right. And that you support the decision to do it, just like I do, because there wasn't a reasonable alternative to stay in an agreement with Russia that hampers our ability to deter China from doing it. So it's just one of those where it was an unnecessary, there was no reason that needed to be a partisan thing. I'm upset with the Democrats because it was crap that they did that.
Well, I think it's definitely partisan. It shows where I come off as more conservative than what most people probably think. Mm-hmm. But to the Democrats, you don't want to increase the opportunity for nuclear war.
And that's fine. That's
a basic Democratic.
I'd like to know what their alternative to it was. You have this situation with China.
We don't want to blow up the world.
I agree. So what are you going to do instead? Are you just going to sit in this agreement that prohibits our use of intermediate range missiles while our two biggest military adversaries arm themselves with these missiles? That's what I'm saying.
I'm just telling
I want
you
from them is a response on their alternative.
They did not have the floor last night.
I know, but they did have a response afterwards where they didn't talk about why that was a problem that the president pulled out. And in fairness to them too, they also haven't really talked in the media about it. They just didn't acknowledge that, that's what we needed to do.
I'm just telling you that's why maybe why they didn't stand up is because most Democrats don't want nuclear weapons on
I would hope all of us don't. I mean, in the ideal world, none of us should want them.
Yeah, but you just said it's okay to have them because we had to have them to protect ourselves.
Well, I've said many times on the air that, if it was up to me and there was a reasonable way I thought to get rid of them, yes. But like you and I talked about on that show, we both agreed that in this situation, there wasn't a lot of alternative options because we can get into a new agreement, but the current agreement's not being followed by the only party that it was relevant to. And it forces us to stay in compliance with no intermediate range missiles while China, who is not bound by said agreement, can go ahead and develop them, which is bad for us. All Americans, not Republicans or Democrats, just all Americans. It's bad if China has weapons that make it easier for them to strike us or our allies, because that looks at dragging us into a war. So maybe there was an alternative, but Lance and I didn't see one. And obviously, I would think if the Democrats did have one, they would have then spoken about that in their address afterwards and said, the reason, we're not supportive of this because, and here's the thing that we would have done instead. So again, not a big deal. Just one of those where it felt unnecessary to not acknowledge that it was probably just the only reasonable thing for us to do. Because he did say later, he'd like to enter a new agreement with China included. But of course, again, no action steps to actually trying to do that, just saying it'd be nice to do. And he mentioned ISIS and, how ISIS has basically been defeated, which Lance and I have talked about before, being you can't defeat an idea.
How's that a positive?
Right?
I thought this was about positive stuff.
You can't defeat an idea.
How's him mentioning that a positive thing?
No, this is another policy item.
We don't agree. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Sorry, I didn't say that before. I've been trying to say it. No, this is it's positive that ISIS controlled more than 20,000 square miles in Iraq and Syria just 2 years ago, and today they control almost nothing. That's a good thing. But at the same time, as Lance and I have talked about, by fighting them, we've also given them more reason to continue to fight us. So don't know if there's a better choice, but I guess it's not. It's like that. What was that thing early on that we talked about, or the women thing? It's like, yeah, it's good, but there's a much bigger problem there, and we don't want that to minimize the severity of the much larger problem, which isn't as simple as, well, they just don't have any land left. And then ended the speech again with calls for bipartisanship. So, and that America, has done incredible, great things before and can do them again. Which, who doesn't agree with that? Yep, that would be a fact. So.
Rah, rah, sis, boom, bah.
So, surprised or not surprised, Lance? Final thoughts. Was there anything in it that you didn't expect?
I thought he went a little right wing on his social issues, obviously placating the base, because that's not really, I don't think are his true feelings, at least in the past. So I thought he went a little far right on some of his issues, to try to build up his positive numbers. I don't think that was a positive thing for him to do as far as being president and getting anything passed in the next 2 years. So I took that as maybe from the speech, he's trying to be adversarial, and that's going to be his tact in the next 2 years to try to win those Midwesterners that he needs to win re-election. So
little pandering.
That kind of surprised me. Yeah. The pandering to the base really did surprise me in that moment. I was very surprised that he stayed on script.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very surprised. He didn't try to make eye contact with the entire audience.
Right.
He wasn't trying to reach out and make America whole again.
So you think there's some physical signs that didn't match maybe the words that were being said?
Only when the Democrats would applaud would he look at them. His ego getting in the way. So there's no healing, and the country needs healing. And he's continuing, I think, to divide. That's an observation. It's not a surprise, but he had the opportunity to do some healing. And while the words were healing, his actions weren't necessarily healing.
And if you're going to lead, you got to do both, right? Because it can't just be talk a big game. You got to play the big game.
Right.
Yeah, I actually did notice that during the speech. I'm glad you mentioned it because I wasn't thinking about it. But during the speech, I took note of he spent a lot of time looking to his left, which, of course, is the right side of the House chamber where the Republicans were seated. So, yeah, that was a little disappointing, I guess, at least if he had if he had regularly looked at everybody, then you could have had a little more belief in the words. I was disappointed, to be honest. Not disappointed in, again, the speech itself, disappointed that this is not the Trump that we know. Because, he was well behaved, I think, by most regards. He did some things that we can critique and so forth, and we can talk about why we didn't like, lack of action plan, but that was not rally Trump, say whatever I want, don't care what people think. So I'm wondering if he's a little scared.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But that to me the fact that he basically didn't go off script at all, other than for a couple words here or there. I don't know.
He's paying. Did you notice Mitch McConnell never smiled to the whole speech? There were a few times we got up and applauded.
Can he smile though? Does he do that?
I don't know, but there was.
I don't know if I've ever seen him ever smile.
Let's face it. For the president to be successful, he's going to need Senator McConnell, and I'm not sure he's got him right now.
Yeah.
This wall thing in the next 10 days is going to be huge.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a clue. Don't even ask me. I don't have a clue on how this is all going to play out, but it's going to be very interesting to watch, and I think it's going to set the tone for what happens over the next 18 months.
We'll find out. Yeah, I was disappointed. And not because I like who Trump regularly is. I was just disappointed that this was I don't know. It felt like he was running scared or something.
He was watching. He was definitely watching his P's and Q's.
Wanted to, like you said, wanted to play to the base. And I don't know, just not what we're used to. So maybe I shouldn't be disappointed. I should just be, I don't know, surprised. Because it wasn't surprising. It was like, we had the shutdown that didn't go the way you thought it was going to go. Tried to backpedal your blame. That didn't work. People were still mad at you. So maybe he's feeling that. Or maybe not. Maybe he's just decided to take it easy for a day and not do anything crazy. So who knows?
We shall find out.
The one thing we can say for certain is that we definitely don't know the reasons for the things he does.
Why he does the things he does.
That's right. Let us know your thoughts, please. What did you think of the State of the Union address? Of course, we'll be following this stuff to see, if anything comes of any of it, and we'll see what happens with the government shutdown. But Lance, there's a lot of ways that new people can tune in. So if one of our listeners wants to go tell somebody to check out the State of Us, where can they tell them to find us?
Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and anywhere else fine podcasts are found.
Absolutely. And of course, you can connect with us and let us know your thoughts at TrueChat.org, TrueChat.org on Facebook, Twitter, and more. So please do reach out and connect. We'd be interested to hear from you and what you've got to say.
Listen to Spotify's CEO today on CNBC.
Yeah.
They were interviewing him. So I was like, hey, I know that dude's company. Right on.
I talk about him on podcasts.
Yeah. You ought to give me a cut of his stock.
Ooh, that would be very nice.
Yes.
That'd be great.
Anyway, sorry.
No,
you can cut that out. I just throw that in there. It's like, hey, I actually knew somebody that they were talking about.
That's right.
I know his company.
Like, I know what Spotify is.
Yeah, I knew that.
Kind of.
Almost.
For the State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the State of Us. Be the change.